at the bottom of 60 and the beginning of 61. I'm going to just start by reading. Good and wise friends, when your mind takes refuge with your own essential nature, it takes refuge with the real Buddha. Self-refuge means getting rid of all unwholesome states of mind, all jealousy and envy, flattering and fawning, egotism, lying and deceit, contempt, rudeness and disrespect, bias and distortion, arrogance, and all other unwholesome tendencies whenever they arise. Always recognizing your own faults and not gossiping about others' rights and wrongs is taking self-refuge. Always humble and respectful, just this is the unobstructed seeing of the essential nature. This is taking self-refuge. So, generally, the idea is when you take refuge, we went over this question, what it means to take refuge and rely. And generally it refers to an external focus to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. But here he introduces the idea called self-refuge. And again, it's very important to understand what he means by self-refuge is not taking refuge in the ego or in one's own narcissistic identity, but rather to take refuge with the essential self-nature, the true nature, and to go back and to return and rely on that ground as the ground of your spiritual cultivation, the ground not only of your spiritual cultivation, but your basic humanity. He's making a claim here that the basic root of the human has this incredible potential for goodness, for compassion, and ultimately for great wisdom, but that it is innate, it's embedded, it's our birthright, if you want to use that language. So when he says take refuge, he's saying go back to that root, go back to that source, find your true original nature, and stay on it. We were talking about this chapter just a little bit this week in one of our seminars. And again, just an interesting point, although this is considered to be the major text on sitting meditation, Chand's chapter, actually just a couple pages, is devoted to sitting meditation. And this is one of the longest chapters called To Repent and Renew. And so we were talking about that, and essentially why he doesn't spend much time on the sitting meditation, and because it's only a limited technique basically to get you, or get the person who's sitting to come back to self-refuge, to actually return to that ground. And the reason sitting meditation is important is because physically, emotionally, psychologically, intellectually, we scatter. He says we become lost and confused and our mind wanders. And so the meditation in and of itself is not important, but it's only important in that it's directing us back to that space. That's where the real work is. So meditation is an expedient means, not an end in itself. And it's to bring about a certain awareness or mindfulness of this ground, this where you take self-refuge. So that's why this chapter is extremely important, because if you think there's metaphysics here, there probably is, and there's profound teachings on emptiness and nirvana and so forth. But in this chapter, what he's pointing out is all of that understanding, all of that knowledge is not merely intellectual understanding. It comes through a direct seeing that results from the transformation of one's own being. And so his emphasis here is to lay out the actual mechanisms, if you want to say the technique or technology of self-cultivation, to gain access to all of that is profound, and all of that's true, and all of that's liberating. So here you might think, well, gee, he says good and wise advisors, you take refuge in your own essential nature, and then he says it's getting rid of. This is very interesting. He doesn't say it's seeking after, or it's trying to get, or it's longing for, or even aiming for some kind of spiritual state or even awakening. He says it's getting rid of. So this is really an important, the mechanism is really important, because it means in the actual practice, the spiritual practice, or the practice of being a human being in this sense, it means that you're actually simply removing that which obstructs this innate light, this innate nature. So the idea is that it's already awakening or altered states of consciousness or signs or omens, that's the other thing, or even occult penetrations through, well, what we talked about all the different kinds of occult, orgery, stargazing, that's the old expression for basically astrology. Gambling is just another form of this kind of seeking outside. So when he says all you have to do is get rid of the unwholesome, because getting rid of the unwholesome, it manifests by itself. Now, we say this over and over again, but it's really easy when one begins to practice to think, I'm going to go sit in meditation to have an awakening experience, to get bodhi, to have a satori. And I told you the story about our friend here, a longtime friend, is Houston Smith, said, when we were translating this, I shared some of this with him, and he said he really liked the different translation of dun, not as sudden, but as direct awakening, because it's usually translated as sudden awakening. And he said, oh, this is very helpful. He said, for years, I lusted after satori. I lusted for awakening. And he said when he went to Japan to do sitting meditation, he thought, this is a 1-week session, and if I'm really, really sincere, I will have that sudden awakening. At the end of 7 days, it's sort of like the temple will open up and a bolt of lightning will come, and I'll have a sudden awakening experience. And he said, I missed the point completely. Awakening is not something you get suddenly. It's something that happens when you get rid of your impediments. And he said, actually, that might not be so sudden. that actually might take a while. So it's not so much the speed at which this might happen, but the direction in which you put your attention and energy that means that it's direct rather than happening suddenly. So here, what he's doing is then taking us back to, he said, and by the way, it's not very esoteric and profound. You do not have to go into really high philosophical conjuring or ponderings here. He says, get rid of all unwholesome states of mind. Like jealousy and envy. Oh, well, you just kind of go through these. Do any of these apply? This is sort of like a basic inventory you take. I know some people are jealous and envious, and I know some that flatter and fawn, and I know egotists, and just take my name off here, But if one is really honest, these can be really important teachers. In other words, rather than try to deny this or pretend it's not there, what he's actually saying is really call a spade a spade. If it manifests, acknowledge it. Truly recognize your own faults. And the reason for doing this is not so much that you want to berate yourself or feel guilty or ashamed, but simply it's diagnostic. This is just simply saying, okay, for me, my background, being from where I'm from and my genetic roots, I don't have skin that does well in the sun. I have to be, some people do. They can just sit in the sun. I can't. And so every year, now I have to go to this doctor and look at all these little spots on my body, right? And some that I can't see, and then some comes up and I start worrying, is this melanoma, blah, blah, blah. And what this is talking about is you need to look at these faults in the same way you'd look at a little skin blotch. In other words, don't cosmetically put something over the top of that. Actually go in there, because it's actually, and I know this sounds funny, it's the Buddha. This is the Buddha in disguise. Every place where these things set up is really, it's just the Buddha turned off just a little bit, off center. Correcting that, the Buddha aligns again. So this is both a detection thing, that you find these blotches or whatnot and really get at them, but it's an alignment thing. So basically what it's saying, anytime you find jealousy, envy, you find yourself flattering and fawning, you find egotism, like me and mine, it's all about me, blah, 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 or even lying in deceit. And it doesn't mean just lying in deceit towards somebody else, but it can also be sort of lying in self-deception, self-deceit. Excusing something immediately when it arises, not calling it what it is. And so this, or pretending, let's go to the next level, pretending to be something I'm not. It's like, it can be very subtle, but it can be very exaggerated too. Or having a number of masks I wear in different situations, like different clothes. Here I'm with this person, I have this mask on. And then I'm with this person, and it's like, who is there behind the masks? You know, do you ever see the film King of Masks? Oh, it's a great film. Here I'm recommending films again. But this is, King of Masks is a great film, and it's based on an old Chinese street troupe entertainment thing, and the person's able to turn and a different mask keeps coming on, and he's called the King of Masks. That's actually a very Buddhist movie because there's a whole Buddhist theme in there. He wants to take a young disciple, and he only takes boys. But this girl really wants to learn. And so she pretends she's a boy and gets in his favor and helps him out. And this is wonderful. It's a tearjerker of a movie, but it's really good. But the King of Masks, that you're asking, once he starts doing it, who's the person there? When all the masks are gone, who is that? And so it's sort of like this idea of deceit has to do with, am I inside and outside the same? Am I the same basically when I'm alone in my room and with a crowd? Am I with everybody? It doesn't mean you don't adapt language and whatnot, but is there a truth, an integrity that comes out in all these situations and people really know who I am? And I'm not compromising that to make a deal, to make a to manipulate or change. This is not easy to do. I'm saying this is what it means to be a big dummy. My teacher says, you only get to be a sage when you maximize being a big dummy. That's like, what? He says, if you're really clever and smart, you'll be playing these games. You'll be deceiving, self-deceiving. You'll go through this. And if you don't do it, people think you're really dummy. Why didn't you capitalize on that? Why didn't you go for the juggler when you could? Why didn't you just cut a corner here? It was so easy to cheat or deceive. And he said, you end up cutting yourself short in the long run by doing this. Small advantage, big loss. So, because you lose your character. And by your character, that's all you have to stand on to accomplish the way, is this integrity. So he's going through these things. And then he says contempt, which is basically a kind of arrogance. So it's like arrogance, contempt, rudeness, disrespect, all of that comes out of pride or a overinflated sense of self. And then bias and distortion, not seeing things as they are, not calling things as they are, or having unexamined prejudice or bias towards, and you could think, people of different ethnicity, people of different levels of intelligence, people of different social and economic status. Remember in the verse at the beginning, the Sixth Patriarch wants to write a verse, and the kid says, you're illiterate, how can you write a verse? And then he says to the man he says, well, help me out because I can't write, but that doesn't mean I don't have the Buddha nature. And he said, don't slight beginners. Don't slight someone because they can't read or write. Actually, I must say, in all my experience of teaching, reading and writing can be a very good tool, but can also be something that we cut ourselves with. Because it can lead to a cleverness with words and language, when perfected, actually can manipulate and confuse people greatly. And when you listen to people discourse, if your ear is really attuned, you're actually carving through the manipulation of words. You're looking behind them. And certain people you just expect what they say is not real. It's hidden. It's masking something else, and so you're trying to get at it. So it's very, very difficult with words and language not to turn them into tools of deceit and deception and manipulation. To use it as, my teachers say, talk straight, talk from your heart, true talk. And if you started to sway just a little bit off, like sort of spinning it, making some rationalization, bang, he was like, especially when we were talking and we were next to him, he would just look over like that. And you knew, it's sort of like, I knew I was doing that, but I was hoping nobody else knew. And then he knew right away, even as Chinese, I was English, he was Chinese, he knew when I was moving off that place. And then he'd say to Heng Shi, sometimes he wouldn't do it directly because he knew I couldn't take the heat. So I'd be going on and on, doing this spin of some sort or whatever. And then he'd turn to Heng Shi and he'd say, Ta shuo shama. What did he say? And I knew that expression in English. Basically, it was thumbs down, no star here. So in his feedback there, one of the purposes he served was to echo back my falseness when it came out. I didn't like it. But at the same time, it really helped me get away from using words and language in false and deceptive ways. He says, this line is very interesting, whenever they arise. Whenever they arise. In other words, I think implied here is you never know when they're going to come up. Sometimes they come at the moment that you really least want to face them. Also, it means that they may be coming up again and again. It's not that you face them once, you face them down and they're over. They can come back again and again. And part of cultivation is this mindfulness to see when they're coming up, under what conditions, and then start to tune it so that you're aware that in this situation, in this relationship, in this way, this can come up. You're very easily prone to having it come up, and then you start to tease out your environment better, to put yourself in situations where they don't get reinforced. And sometimes these are relationships. Sometimes certain relationships bring out these tendencies more than others, and you have to sort of watch that. Sometimes certain careers. You know, I'm sorry to say, but there are certain careers that are based on rudeness and disrespect. Anything recent? Oh, sorry. You know, and there's also certain things that are based on flattery and fawning. I would say, if you want to get into it, most advertising is based on flattery and fawning. You deserve it. You're special. Go on, indulge yourself. You know, and bias and distortion, give me a break. This will make you happy. This will make you content. So if you start to think about it, when you get into right livelihood, there may be livelihoods you don't even think are bringing out and reinforcing these tendencies. So it's the levels that you can go in the mindfulness here are really interesting. I often found for myself that hanging around younger children generally was a good check, a good mirror on these tendencies in myself. Because Mencius has a really good expression. He says, the great person, a really genuine, outstanding person, the exemplary person, is he or she who never loses the child's heart, who never loses their child's heart. And those of you who spend time with children, I don't mean to deify children, of course, you know. What is it? William Golding's Lord of the Flies. I mean, you can, okay, I don't want to, you know, but there is a quality in children before it's too distorted or tainted, before they learn too much hatred and deception, where there's a genuineness there. And when they're hurt, they're really hurt. And when they're happy, they're really happy. And when they say something, they don't mean it bad, but they speak truth to power. They just say, oh, the emperor has no clothes. You know, and everybody else is pretending. So in that child heart, that I think that's what Mencius is referring to here. You have a kind of mirror and echo that catches, sometimes with juxtaposition, adults look really bad in the realm of children. And children kind of wonder, why are they doing all that? Because they spot the inconsistencies really quickly. So having children as friends can be bittersweet. I mean, they're nice and they're funny, you can play with them, but also they'll call out your faults. And if you try to hide them, they'll go after them, especially if you're a teacher. So watch out. They're very attuned in this way. So he says, whenever they arise, and this means don't get upset if they do arise, only worry that you won't acknowledge and recognize. Because what happens here is once we invest in these, and once we build up a personality and maybe a business or some kind of persona around this, we're invested in it. And our investment is to keep these things active and really sharp and going. And so when they arise and we see them for what they are, there's a tendency to immediately to deny them, to cover them up, to rationalize them and put them away. And it's right at that moment we lose the edge on cultivation. It's right there we lose the good advisor and we sink into a kind of zone of self-unawareness, self-denial. So this is really important to, I mean, and you don't want to beat yourself, you know, flagellate yourself that, oh, there's my envy again or my greed, you know. You don't do that. You just almost clinically say, there it is again. Interesting, there it is again. I make this observation. Because this is very therapeutic and it's very clinical. You don't want to be judgmental. That's why he says don't fault finding here. Oh, here it comes. Always recognize your own faults. Oh, no, it's always recognizing others' faults and not your own. That's the way. Oh, sorry. Always recognizing your own faults and not gossiping about others' rights and wrong is taking self-refuge. It's like, well, wait a minute. I'm a bodhisattva. It's my job to point out people's faults. How are they going to correct themselves if I don't do it? Gee, wow. Isn't it kind of like narcissistic to just recognize my own? Yeah, don't go there. I think what he's saying here, it's really important to clear this ground first and always, and then you have some cred. You can actually point out others' faults if your own faults are not in the way, or it's instead of recognizing your own faults. For example, we're going to later see in this chapter that disciples come to him and he points out their faults. Say, wait a minute, is there a contradiction here? They have faults and he points them out. And here he's saying, don't point out others' rights and wrongs. So what's the difference? How is it okay in the later chapters and not? And I think what he's saying here is instead of facing your own faults, you put your emphasis on looking at others' faults. And it's not necessarily to liberate them or help them, it's actually to make you feel a little better, a little more superior. And it takes the emphasis and the attention away from yourself, because everybody could be worse. See, I have some faults, but they're not as bad as his or hers. And so in the way that he's doing it in the part with his lively encounters, he's doing it therapeutically. He's doing it therapeutically. In other words, he's spotting the faults, but he points them out in such a way that they actually have a reversal. They accept it. They not only accept it, they welcome it. And sometimes they put their palms together and cry and say thank you to him. That doesn't happen. I pointed out my sister's faults for years. Not one time did they ever say, oh, thank you. No. And it's like, why? I don't think I was doing it in the right way or for the right reasons. That doesn't mean I didn't hit the nail on the head, but I was also hitting the head, of them. And I was like, and who was I? Well, I was the little bodhisattva who was faultless, pointing out their faults. My gosh, and then when they pointed out my fault, it was like revenge. They were getting even. So you got to have a space where even if you have faults, you're open to getting it. Then you can give it. But if you're always in the, quote, superior position, pointing out there's faults, and you can't receive it on your own, much less recognizing your own, you lose all virtue. And so there's no way. So this is the idea. When you have virtue, meaning I recognize my faults, I'm working on them, I'm careful, I don't think they're always gone, they're getting less, but whatnot. The virtue has this humility to it and this openness to it. When you have that, you can actually work with somebody else in a kind, therapeutic way and say, I don't think this is going to work for you, that choice and whatnot, and it'll be received. There's a famous passage from, I think, the Tao Te Ching. It says, this virtue, this quality of character is the only knife that can carve without hurting. Virtue is the only knife that can cut without harming. In other words, it can go right into that weak spot of your personality and touch it, and it doesn't hurt because it's coming with a kind, not up over somebody or to get even or make them feel bad because, and so forth. And the fawning and flattery is the same way. It's the opposite of fault finding. Because there you're not recognizing your own or others, and you're just buttering and honeying it over as a manipulative thing to get something. So these are two sides of a same coin that have to do with dishonesty. Anyways, he's like, always humble and respectful. And this is the unobstructed seeing of the essential nature. This is taking self-refuge. Let's read this next passage and see if we can... Now he's going back to the reward body. Remember, he's talking about the three bodies of the Buddha as being our own potentials. What is the perfect, complete reward body of the Buddha? Just as one lamp can disperse 1,000 years of darkness, one insight can wipe out 10,000 years of delusion. Do not think about the past. It is gone and can never be recovered. And do not keep you thinking about what is to come. Instead, with every moment of thought, perfect and clear, see or regard or look at your original nature. This, it doesn't mean just, you can use the word see, but here it means pay attention to your original nature. The good and evil, though good and evil differ, the original nature is non-dual. That non-dual nature is the real nature. This real nature, unstained by either good or evil, is called, quote, the perfect, complete reward body of the Buddha. If a single thought of evil arises within the essential nature, it destroys the 10,000 eons of good karma. One good thought generated from the essential nature erases evils as many as sands of the Ganges River. To reach unsurpassed Bodhi directly, discern this in every moment of thought, and do not lose your fundamental mindfulness. This is the perfect, complete reward body of the Buddha. So again, he's introducing a mechanism, and he's introducing a focus. The focus of the mindfulness is not to be mindlessness. Okay, some people mistake this as saying, I recite the Buddha's name or I recite mantras so that my mind stops and I reach a state of tuned out, complete absorption, trance-like meditation, recitation. That's not what mindfulness means here. Mindfulness is the opposite of mindlessness. It means you're actually using whatever your recitation is to hold a field of observation steady, so when these things arise, you catch them really quickly. Because if you don't have that ability to juxtapose, envy, jealousy, whatnot, just sweep over, they're almost habitual. You don't even realize it until maybe you're falling asleep at night and you say, gee, I wonder if I should have said that to her. Because I realized she cried and blushed and whatnot too late. So, and it's like, and why did I say it? Because something turned inside of me really quickly that I didn't control, and out it came. So the mindfulness here means there's an attunement of your sensibilities of observation. This is heightening your sense of observation rather than muting it down to only single-minded absorption. It's really important to understand the difference, because recitation or mindfulness, in this practice, and even while you're doing a retreat with mindfulness, is not to get to single-minded zone out. It's to get to a place where the 10,000 scattered habits and whatnot are now having to compete with this one space, and when they arise, the juxtaposition is profound. It's like bas relief. It stands out like never before. So mindfulness has to do with, it's a dynamic, interesting quality, stopping, holding, and then boom, watching. Stopping, holding, and boom, watching. And it's by going back and forth that you begin to catch these things. So this is very clear because he goes on. I think we went through this earlier. Did we go through? Yeah, we did. When he talks about dull emptiness sitting, in other words, thinking that stopping all thoughts, stopping all awareness, shutting the system down is sitting meditation. He says, no, that's just really stupid and it's actually harmful. So he's saying what it is constantly thought after thought, knowing, aware what's going on, watching thoughts as they arise, watching feelings as they arise, checking and balancing and so forth. So it's actually a heightened awareness rather than a dulled down awareness. And this is really important because you'll never catch this stuff. I would say for me, my experience has been without a good teacher, I never would have caught half of mine. Okay, I'm just saying this really honestly. These kinds of things, these character flaws or whatever you want to call them that are there, are so quick, so deeply embedded, and they served us so well. Most of us got to a point where we're using these quite efficiently to negotiate a space of identity in the world and move ourselves forward. When they're established in that way, they're really hard to spot. They're as natural as breathing, as the sound of our own voice. So unless a good and wise teacher comes up and says, mirror, mirror on the wall, take a look, and go, ugh, whoa, caught it. Unless there's that therapeutic doctor, it's very hard to catch these. But when you meditate, when you do the practices, if you do them right, then they will rise up. And then most people make the misinterpretation and say, my meditation's not working. All this crap is coming up. That's a ganying, that's a response. Because it's working, it's revealing this. It's not like when you meditate that this would go away and you just see lotus flowers and guanyin telling jokes. What's happening when you do this is you're catching it. You're catching the turning. You're doing what a good spiritual mentor would be doing on your own. And the mentor is that mindfulness that holds that steady, and all of a sudden it arises. So when you go to meditation, you cross your legs, you're sitting like this. Eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body all gather in. They're not going out. There's no distractions. Well, what does the mind do? It goes bananas then. And that's exactly what you want to have too. Because from this mind, it goes out through the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and it's too late then. So by shutting those down, now you've corralled the wild horse. But the wild horse is now kicking up a storm because it doesn't have its outlets. And so all of a sudden you see all this garbage coming up and you go, oh my gosh, where did that come from? I must be citing the wrong name. Maybe if I recite Earth Store, no, it doesn't matter what you read. You could recite Hickory Dickory Dock. And it's still going to come up because you're holding your mind steady and it will reveal itself. This is exactly what you want. Now, you don't seek this out. Don't go, oh, I really want to see garbage. Let's see garbage. No, don't do that. That's another kind of seeking. What you want to do is to be available to it when it arises. Don't seek it out and don't repress it. Let it come up. Recognize it. And in recognizing it, you're halfway there. That's what he calls walking half the way to the Pure Land. Simply just recognizing it. The next stage is to sort of call it what it is and don't feed it. Don't inflame it. Don't inform it. And what's interesting, if you do not do that, if you simply do not do that, it will fail and fall off by itself. This is what it means. It returns to emptiness. Because these these flaws are all movements. That's why I say just get rid of them. Don't feed them. And that's it. Everything, the whole will manifest in itself. So it's very tricky in that if you don't acknowledge and recognize them, you can't let them go. And not letting them go, they continue to hold you and continue to hold you. You just keep going in this vicious cycle. But the fundamental thing to realize is that they don't have any nature of their own. Otherwise, it'd be really hard. If these are real entities, real goblins and demons, and they're real, as you imagine to be, like hydras, and every time you cut off one, 10 manifest, if they had real existence like this, I don't know that we'd ever be able to do this, if you think about it. But if you actually think about these are made from your mind, they're sustained from your mind, they're fed by your mind, they're precious, you take care, oh, my little precious anger, and I'm going to feed you, and, if you stop doing that, they have no existence because they are chimeras, they're figments of the imagined mind. That's why it says these things are fundamentally empty. The fundamental value of emptiness is that they don't have any self-existence of their own. They're interdependent. This is one of the meanings of pratitya samyapati. They arise in conditions that we reinforce. Don't reinforce them, they go away. They're not fundamental and they don't have anything of their own. This is what it means they have no nature. They lack a nature. Okay? Wow, this is pretty cool.
Mark,
so, yes?
I was curious about this sentence here. If a single thought of evil arises within the essential nature, it destroys 10,000 eons of good karma.
Mm-hmm.
So that seemed contradictory to me, like a thought of evil arising within the essential nature. That doesn't seem possible.
Right. So now we have to go back. What does he mean by non-dual? What he means by non-dual here is that this essential nature, when he said, remember his awakening experience, it's whole and complete, lacking nothing, that it's unborn and undying. And then he says, and the 10,000 things arise from this essential nature. So what he's saying here is this essential nature is not some fixed, eternal, or essentialist pure essence that exists there, untarnished, unresponsive, and more importantly, static. But it's a dynamic potential quality that we have within our nature that functions in many ways. It can, when attuned and working, create Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. And it can also, if not watched and let go in another direction, create demons and serial killers. And so what it's saying here is not saying it's essential. This essential nature is this potential. It's a dynamic act of potential. And he's saying all 10,000 things. He means all the phenomena of our existence, what we think, what we imagine, what we make, what we do, all of that is coming from this nature. So when he's saying thought after thought, attend to this, it's a dynamic, actively functioning potential that's working as we do it. So if that thought comes up and it's not caught, you see, it's not caught, and all of a sudden it's got a saddle on it, and it's got a sleigh behind it, and down the road we go with our jealousy, it's like then all that goodness is just plowed over.
Yeah.
On the other hand, so that my teacher would often say, what this means is when bad or unwholesome ideas, thoughts, feelings have not arisen, do not let them arise. Do not plant those. And those that have come up, pull them back. And then he says, good that hasn't arisen, feed and encourage that. And the good that's already going, support and augment it. But again, it's not like static, it's dynamic. So you can go for 10 days without something like this happening. You know, you got a nice 10-day retreat, and nobody's coughing or sneezing, and people have been taking regular showers, so it smells okay in there. No, Hung Liang told me a story about her first retreat where she thought not bathing was the proper way. She was into it about 5 days into the retreat, hot, the city of 10,000 Buddhas thing, and thinking, I'm pure, I'm not showering, you know. And then Master Wah came in and he said, oh, it stinks in here. He said, you people should take showers. She had her head down like this. Yeah. So what I'm saying is if you really got to a place where you had a handle on it and you really had a good retreat and you were feeling really like, Pinocchio and like, oh, I'm so good, or Tinkerbell or something, and then all of a sudden, something happened. That's that turning, that place of turning. Now, what you do at that point is simply don't let it get away. That's the first step. Don't feed it and reinforce it. That means it arose, but you didn't give it into it. And this is the important thing, because will they arise? There's no problem with their arising. The problem is attaching, and attaching doesn't mean just grabbing onto them. It means liking them, wanting them, feeding them, encouraging them. That's what attachment is.
Or struggling with them.
Or, beating them down, repressing them. But simply watching them rise and fall on their own still keeps you in the ground of the essential nature where you're neutral. So he's saying this is the origin. There's no creation that's been done. There is only creating. This is a very important point. In Buddhism, there's no primal beginning creation, nor no end. But there's only a constant creating going on, and you're the creator and your creation simultaneously because you're making this from your mind alone. You are also the corrector and the redeemer of your own. So that you're in the driver's seat all the time. And all he's saying is get a handle on this mechanism. Because the mechanism is the only thing that determines your fate or destiny. And therefore, when he says it's non-dual, he means the good and the bad are in that same nature. The Buddha and the demon are within that same nature. The worldly and world transcending all arise from this nature depending on how you use. And so he uses the word yung, which means functioning. Functioning. It's something you're doing. It's not like, I'm in my essential nature. No. It's something you're actively using. It is the actual mechanism of our thoughts and feelings and emotions as they're coursing through us, hour by hour, thought by thought, day by day. That's the actual ground of awakening, or the ground of imprisonment is right in that spot. So what he's doing here is, by saying this, don't assume that the essential nature is someplace unapproachable by anything. Because then it would be outside the sphere of human will and choice. There wouldn't be any, you would be destined or doomed, depending on how you read it. But he's saying, no, this is lively, functioning, dynamic. That's why impermanence is both, it's a double-edged sword. It's everything's impermanent. I'm going to lose her or him or my teeth or my hair, blah, blah, blah. The other side of impermanence, it means everything can change. I'm not stuck here. I'm not fated. So impermanence has both, in its non-duality, both a positive and a other aspect to it. If there was no impermanence, my gosh, whoa. Whoever, you married, that would be it forever. Oh, sorry, I shouldn't use, let me start up another one. If there was no impermanence, you couldn't change your major, you couldn't change your career, right? If there's no impermanence, you can't even change the destiny of you couldn't have a war that ended in anything but. The possibility for change means there's flux and possibility of change. Without change, everything locked in, we're doomed and destined to just stay on the same rut. But it's not foreordained it will go one way or the other, except through human will and intention. So it's like there's incredible freedom in this mechanism and incredible responsibility. It's like they go hand in hand. I like the freedom. I don't like the responsibility. But you can't have one without the other here. So that's where it's a good question. Yeah. Okay. I just say a little bit about maybe, I want to share a passage from Mencius tonight too. But on this thing here, what is going on in the child's heart, I really want to come back to that because I'm thinking through my own experience with my teacher, one of the things I felt, when we came in, most of the early disciples had, tested a lot of life, some of that you wouldn't recommend to anybody today or their children or anything. But we were, pushing edges and boundaries, trying to figure out what it was about. Even, to some extent, actually kind of living on the edge because there's an adrenaline that comes when you can, push yourself to some physical edge and then you survive it. For me, it was wild motorcycle and rock climbing stuff and jumping out of airplanes without parachutes. But here, when we met our teacher, what was very interesting, yes, you could see that he was very wise and virtuous, but what always struck me about him was his childlike nature, this utter open heart simplicity. Now, it wasn't naivete, don't get me wrong, it wasn't like a child can be beguiled or confused, it wasn't that, but there was always a readiness and openness to be just like a little child in accessibility and in clarity and speaking and receiving. If you showed the slightest intent that was really sincere, man, this thing just opened up to receive you. There was never any cynicism or sarcasm and so forth. And I'm trying to think, wow, that quality really then pushed it on us because he was saying, unless you get like this, you won't have accomplishment in your cultivation. If you're smart and clever and manipulative and cynical and sarcastic, you may get far in the world, but in terms of the way, you're just not going to get any place. And so you had to have a childlike heart in order to cultivate, in order to accept his teachings, and even to let go of the attachments. A childlike heart releases the belly. So people, if you're holding a tight belly, it's because the childlike heart is not allowed to open up. And when you do this, the one word I associate when somebody said, what was it like to be in his presence? And I said, vulnerable. There was a vulnerability. And a child also has a vulnerability, but in that vulnerability, without fear, there's an openness to explore and grow and learn. But as soon as we get burnt once, we pull it back. And so the challenge is to retain the child's heart throughout. I think that's why this expression Lao Tzu has, the sage, at all times and in all places, hears and sees no more than an infant sees and hears. And it means not that they're like dumb or naive or they're not aware, but they never lose the child heart. This passage I want to read you tonight from Mencius. I really like Mencius, and I see if I can find it here. Okay, so he's got a similar thing here, and he's saying basically human nature has this incredible, wonderful potential for goodness, for benevolence. He uses the word righteousness, but by righteousness, he doesn't mean self-righteousness. He means you're true, there's integrity, you're incorruptible, that you hold steady. One of the examples they use is the evergreen. The evergreen is righteous, and the poets say because winter, fall, spring, or summer, it always keeps the green color. Conditions come and go, but the evergreen stays the same. That's what righteousness means. And so it's about not so much how you feel about others, it's about not willing to compromise your truthfulness and your integrity. So he's got this wonderful passage here. He says, Mencius said that benevolence, and it means humane, kind, benevolent, is the heart of man, it's the heart of the human. And righteousness, that what we meant here, is the path that a human walks. It's the path we should be walking. And then he says, how lamentable it is to neglect this path and not pursue it, or to lose this heart-mind and not know to seek it again. So it can happen that we do stray from this. As E. Cummings said, children remember, but only a few, and down they forget as up they grew. So as we get older and more mature, we get really good at losing this. We think we're moving ahead, but we're actually losing this. And so he says, how lamentable to lose this heart mind and not know to seek it again. Then he has this wonderful passage. He says, when a person's chickens or dogs are lost, they know to seek for them again. But when they lose their mind, their heart, they don't know to seek for it. And then he said, the great end of learning, of study, of cultivation is nothing else than to seek for the lost mind, the lost heart. So again, I think there's a tone in here of, it doesn't matter if in reflection I feel I've lost it, or I've covered it over, or I've tarnished it. It's like it's always there, just waiting to come out. All you have to do is get rid of this, and it comes through again, and then not lose it. Not lose it. And it's hard. It's hard not to lose it, but damn, it's so much more meaningful to live when it's vibrant and alive. You'll get along with children a lot better, by the way, but I think you'll get along with a lot. You may take some losses that come from gains, but even Mencius was saying gains gotten that way will not last. And losses gotten from staying within this are not real losses. And that last week I told you that story of my father, because I felt for my father, he kept to this pretty much. And as a result, he still felt wealthy, even though he wasn't a wealthy man when he passed, because the wealth was in this area. And so I think, it's worth. Now, that being said, I want to tell you a quick thing, and I encourage you to work on this, because look at this. I don't know, did any of you see the New York Times this week? There was a little side section called The Forger. Oh, okay. Go back to the New York Times, just click on it. It's called The Forger. Do you know what a forger is? Everybody? Okay. A forger is someone who, you can go to prison for forgery. So if if I find your checkbook and I write out a check and try to copy your name and then cash it, that's forgery. So it's falsely changing documents. And this story is about praising a forger. So I'll just tell it briefly for you, and then I hope you go look at it, because it's really, it struck me, it really impressed me. And the person that sent it to me was my little niece, because she thought it was cool. So here, basically it starts, this is a story about a man. He came from a very poor family in France, and so couldn't really go to school and had to provide for his family, especially his mother, who was a widow. And so he had, at 16 and 17, just go out and find a job, to make money. And he was brought in by a dry cleaners, a cleaners. Took him in as an apprentice, and he kind of had a knack for it. They said one time they brought in a wedding dress that had ink on it, and the bride was all crying, and he went home and figured out, and he found the right chemicals to take the dye out and restored the dress. He even had a picture of it in this thing. So, but then he was Jewish. And of course, France then in the occupation was taken over by the Germans, and there was also some collaboration going on with the Vichy government and the Nazis. And so the police, generally the police and the Nazis were all of one mind. And they put him into a pre-concentration camp. In other words, a holding place where then they would go off to, Buchenwald or Auschwitz or whatever. And in that camp, for some reason, he was lucky enough, his brother didn't get put in right away. His brother wrote to the Argentinian embassy and made a special appeal, and because they were Argentinian Jews that had come to France, they got out, as opposed to those who were native to France went off to the ovens. And so he got out, but when he was in the camp, he was just a boy, and he looked around, he saw all these people, and he knew what was going to happen to him. They knew what was going to happen to him, and it broke his heart that so many people would have to die. And so he had that childlike heart. He says, I got out, but look, all my friends and whatnot are behind. What can I do? And so he thought to join the resistance. And so he went to a resistance leader surreptitiously and said, can I join? He said, you can join, but, you're a puny kid. You can't fight. You don't have any training with weapons. You're not educated, so we can't use you really as a spy. You're just a naive little kid. So, yeah, what can you do? Well, I work in a laundry. Oh, says the guy. So you can take out dyes and things? Yeah. Oh, he says, come with me. And he sets him up with a little shop, and basically his skill with removing stains and dyes allows him to then alter passports and documents. And it's an amazing story, like when it shows, for example, they get their document, which is food rations. He says nobody eats without the ration card. But on all of them, they do in red letters, Juden, or Jew. in red. And so it showed him, he figured out how he could go in and remove that red thing, and it became a regular card. And so he set himself up and he said, it smelled so badly with the chemicals I was using in the apartment, and because there was a huge suspicion, I called myself a painter. And he wore a beret to make him look like a painter, and he got a bunch of paintings he put in there. Some people knock on the door, what's going on? I'm a painter. And they, oh, that's the smell. But it really wasn't the painting he was covering over, he was doing these chemicals. Now, the heart of the story is really good, is that once they came to him and said, there's 300 children who are going to be sent off to the gas chambers tomorrow, kids, unless we can get their passports forged. And it's got to be done like in 24 hours. And he said, 300. Because you've got to go in there, the work that's involved, you have to go in there, erase other things, and you have to put the photos and get those in. And he was using a bicycle wheel to run his generator. And then you have to ink it and write it by hand, again, the other ones. And he started and he said, after an hour, he had 8 or 9 done. And he realized, oh my God, I have to crank it up. And he said, but then I got worried. One little mistake will give it away. And he said, if I fall asleep, 30 people will die. If I fall asleep for just a couple minutes. So he pushed himself, he collapsed. His friend woke him up again, he went at it, and sure enough, right at the last minute, he got 300 done. And he saved 300 kids' lives. It's an amazing story. Now, why I'm telling you this is because he went on like this, and there's one part where they knew there was the forger of Paris, and they were after him. And he was on the train going to his next place with all his equipment in his bag. And the police came on the train. And this is done with a sort of animation, but you have his voice, and they show you real stuff. And the police come up, what's in that bag? And he said, be cool, you gotta be cool, don't get nervous. And he reached in the top of the bag and pulled out his sandwich. He said, my sandwich, do you want to see it? And they said, okay, you can go. And he went with his whole bag, and he finished. But then his daughter comes in to tell the rest of the story, because now you see him, he's still alive in Paris, he's in his 90s. And you see this man with a big beard and hair and, shabby old person's clothes going out to get his baguette in the morning. And his daughter says, but my father realized that it wasn't just French or Jews or anybody. All lives deserve to live, and all people should not have their lives taken away by such stupidity and hatred and whatnot. And so he spent the rest of his life doing forgeries for people in all countries all around the world that were in totalitarian dictatorships or under ethnic cleansing and whatnot. And he just kept doing this until he finally couldn't see and write anymore in his 90s. And he's like, I wish I could keep going, but I can't. But what I want to encourage you to see when you look at this documentary at the end, especially when you see him, what I saw was someone who never lost his child's heart. And when you see him talk about this, you see this pure, childlike goodness that after all these years and all that he's seen is still there. He still has a little tear in his eye, he says, for those he could not save. And I think when you look at this, I don't say he's a sage or a bodhisattva, but I do say he exemplifies this quality of character where he never lost it throughout his whole life and kept it up. And when you look at his face, I think you'll see it too. It's quite remarkable. So it's a great thing. It's called The Forger. I think you can just...
Is this an article or is it a documentary?
It's if you have the New York Times, they have these little sections, and they say it's like a little documentary. What's cool about it, why my niece liked it, it was animated with shadow puppets. So you see the train, it's shadow puppet silhouette. She thought that was really cool. And then you have actual film. So you see his daughter, you see him as older. But the other thing I would say pay attention to, listen to his voice. Because he's narrating. And his voice is a childlike, pure voice. He's 90 years old, but you hear him, even in the voice, that true heart going through there. So, yeah, you go and you click on it. It's like that little section where they have specials or documentaries or something, but it's called The Forger. Definitely worth looking at. And especially in these times, it's really nice to see someone with that kind of quality and character, that they're still there in the world. Okay, I guess that's it for tonight. We'll pick up next Friday on this again. Any announcements?
Tomorrow, like always, 7:30 p.m. Sutra by the Refuge. And next week, in the City of 10,000 Buddhas, we will start one session, 7 days retreat.
Anybody else? Announcements? Nothing? Okay, move to the transference. May every living being, our minds as one and radiant with light, share the fruits of peace with hearts of goodness, luminous and bright. If people hear and see how hands and hearts can find in giving unity, may their minds awake to great compassion, wisdom, and to joy. May kindness find reward. May all who sorrow leave their grief and pain. May this boundless light break the darkness of their endless night. Because our hearts are one, this world of pain turns into paradise. May all become compassionate and wise. May all become compassionate and wise. Ding Li San Bao.